Hello everybody, how are you? This is Clint and today I'm with Ian. Ian, I think today you are gonna share with us some insightful ideas about fathers' rights. So I'm curious why you are passionate to talk about this and when did the discrimination start?
Sure. Well, the obvious reason for talking about fathers' rights is because I'm a father, and I got interested in the issue of discrimination against men and specifically against fathers when I became a father, and my son's mother tried to stop me seeing him, and that's when I investigated the law around fathers' rights, and it just goes from there and then into the wider men's rights movement. But for this video, I'd like to talk about the legal discrimination against men as fathers, and right from the very beginning, it starts. So just to define once again the terms, discrimination means treating somebody differently based on their gender, not based on ability or age or some other factor. And there's two types of discrimination. There's legal discrimination, institutionalized discrimination, and there's social or cultural discrimination. There's the two types. So the first type, which is what I'm going to focus on mostly in this video, is where the government sets down a law or policy which directly or indirectly discriminates against men. That means it favors women, either all women have the advantage over all men, or the situation may be less than that. There's some women, but no men have certain characteristics which give them an advantage, while no men have the capacity to fit into that category. That's direct gender discrimination. Indirect discrimination is where a rule or policy, on the face of it, looks gender neutral, but the reality is that it favors women and disfavors men, and that's indirect gender discrimination. Those are legal and institutional discrimination because the government has said we should treat women one way and men the other way, and always this favors women and disfavors men. Then you have cultural discrimination, which is more difficult to define, but basically it's personal choice in most cases. So why are there almost 100% women midwives being women? Over 90% of engineers are male in Britain. This is personal choice, it's not discrimination. Why are most of the top executives in large companies men? Why are most nurses female? These are personal choices, this is not discrimination. The government makes it in fact illegal to discriminate on the basis of gender for any of these positions. And so if any woman genuinely had a genuine grievance with genuine evidence, she'd be able to take a case to court, and it never happens because it's not real discrimination. These cases are pretty much all personal choice. So today we'll talk about legal institutionalized discrimination against men, and particularly against fathers. And it starts right at the beginning. And we could argue when the beginning of becoming a father, the problems of even finding a girlfriend involve discrimination cases. Sexual harassment and false allegations are very, very common because the police are institutionally discriminating against men. They favour or believe women in cases where it's the woman's word against the man. It's absurd. In the absence of evidence, if a woman says he's guilty of harassment, he looked at me for more than 3 seconds and I didn't like it, I felt uncomfortable, I'm a victim, oh okay, then he's guilty of whatever. It's absurd. But we'll go a bit further, and let's assume the two of them have sex and a baby is produced. So again, you can have false allegations of rape because usually there's only the man and the woman in the bedroom at the time, and so he says it was consensual, she says I was drunk, I was unconscious, I was this, I was that, I changed my mind, whatever, halfway through, and of course the man can be found guilty of rape even though he believed it was all consensual.
Yeah,
again,
recently these years a lot of cases were brought up in USA or in Britain, far more than before. So this has been a phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening is as more and more women realise the power of making a false allegation and the fact that there's no punishment, almost never a punishment, and they remain anonymous throughout the whole process while the man gets named and shamed through the courts. As soon as he's accused, particularly if he's like Cliff Richard or someone, famous celebrities get named and shamed instantly. The police in Cliff Richard's case actually contacted the television company, the BBC, before they went round to his house, and so a BBC television crew went with the police to investigate Cliff Richard's house in order to arrest him for some sexual related charge,
So
which was later found innocent, thrown out. It's absurd.
Yeah, the celebrity will be shamed.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
His life.
there are so many cases of the so-called Me Too movement. It's basically a witch hunt against men. And applying laws from today against these incidents or issues that happened 20 or 30 years ago is totally reprehensible behaviour, and it covers up the real victims. The small number of genuine victims of rape or sexual assault are getting lost in all the false allegations and noise and money-making schemes and so on. It's a horrendous mess, and basically these things should be struck out, and people should focus on things they can prove, not what they believe. That's what a court should be about, is evidence, not based on opinion. And there's time limits on these old cases. So anyway, but today let's talk more about fathers. So a baby is produced. The first obvious thing is let's say it was a one-night stand. So the woman has no legal obligation to notify the father that he is to become a father. He has no say in the process, assuming they're unmarried, and he cannot stop, for example, an abortion if the mother wants it, or indeed he can't say to the mother, I want to have the baby even if you don't, so you have the baby and give it to me. None of these things are legal. When it goes to abortion, only the woman needs to sign the form and ask for an abortion. She doesn't have to consult the man, she doesn't have to get his consent or approval. But if she chooses to have the baby, he will become the father, and he will be having to financially support the baby, even though maybe he never even knew it existed and certainly never wanted it. But that's the reality of abortion. It's totally discriminatory. One of the things that does happen more and more now, I believe, it's very difficult to prove, is that a single mother, for example, doesn't want the father involved, and she'll look at she'll have a scan to see what the gender of the baby is, and if it's the wrong gender, she'll have the baby aborted. And in the West, single mothers prefer to have girl babies. I believe in China they prefer to have boy babies. I don't know. And so
over here in China, it's illegal to scan before the baby was born.
Yeah, it's illegal in England to do but since it's only women, and you can't prosecute women for anything.
Right.
No one. It's like who's gonna admit this happens? It's obvious it happens, but it's difficult to prove because they don't keep the records of the gender of the scanned baby before an abortion. I made a Freedom of Information Act request, and they said we don't know because we don't keep the gender records of aborted babies. I mean, you could stop it by reducing the time limit on abortion to say 8 weeks or something, and then by then it's not certain what the gender is. But if you wait till 12, 15 weeks, you know what the gender is, and it makes it very easy to select your gender. So yeah, we're going to talk a lot about things that are illegal, but because it's women that are the only ones who are guilty of this, obviously, because a woman is the only one who can decide whether an abortion happens, a legal abortion. Obviously there are backstreet abortions.
So the point is that during the whole process, the man basically has no rights.
None at all.
Right.
None at all. I mean, if he's married, it's slightly different, but but abortion doesn't matter. The abortion is completely 100% the woman's decision, whether to have the baby or not have the baby, or even to tell the father she's pregnant. She doesn't have to. She's the only one who knows. Obviously, that's not discrimination. That's biological, a biological fact.
For so many years, no men were arguing about this. Only women arguing about gender inequality.
Yeah, I mean the whole issue of abortion and right to life and stuff has become a feminist issue for some reason. I mean, it's not a you can't ban it. Right. Once you have a technique available, then you can't uninvent it. It's like the nuclear bomb. It'd be better if the world didn't have nuclear bombs, but we have them and we can't uninvent it. So it's the same with abortion. It's much better that it's done in a safe environmentally clean hospital, whatever, by medically trained staff than in a back street with somebody using a coat hanger. So you know, the idea of banning it is absurd, but I don't like it. But you know, it's a personal choice, and it's one of the facts of life. Abortion is, again, it's 100% the woman's decision. So let's assume that the woman decides to keep the baby, and then she decides to notify the father. But you know, we call him the putative father, because he doesn't know if he is genuinely the father. Only the woman knows. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she had sex with 20 people. So maybe she doesn't know either. But she will choose somebody, notify, and again, you know, how she chooses is probably based on money. Who knows?
Right.
Anyway, and if you try to be a father and get involved in what's called the antenatal process, so that's going to all the checks with the woman, make sure she's okay, you will be completely ignored by the medical staff. They have zero interest in your role in the process. You are a nuisance, you are in the way, and of course 90% of nurses are female, so you are dealing in an entirely female-dominated environment. There's no attempt whatsoever to make the father welcome. And the appointments will be through the woman. She can choose when she goes to have her checkups, and again, you have, if she invites you, that's, again, it's up to her. Woman has, and again, this is something we'll see a lot of, the woman has the veto, so as to whether you have any involvement, and that includes birth. Again, she can decide to have the birth whenever she wants, or she can doesn't have to involve you at all, doesn't have to call you as the father, doesn't, and there's no requirement for you to be present at the birth, and in many places it's very difficult, even if she agrees, and again, she has the veto, it's her decision whether you're present at the birth, plus the hospital, and they'll find reasons to kick you out if they can. Luckily, I was present at the birth of my son. I was very pleased to be there. And so the baby is born, and the discrimination really kicks into top gear after birth. And the first thing, and again, this is let's just wait for the noise. So selfish. Why should I listen to his music? You should listen on headphones. You know, headphones cost like 20 RMB.
Yeah, his perspective, he's bringing happiness to the world.
Oh, he's bringing unhappiness to the world. He's not asking our opinion.
Yeah, and also, yeah, after the birth,
yeah,
then we'll talk about prenatal care and a lot of other stuff.
Postnatal
right?
care. Yeah, again, I mean, the most obvious thing after birth, if it's a boy baby, then some religious, usually Jewish or Muslim women particularly, but some others believe it's the right thing to do to butcher the baby's penis, known as circumcision, within a few days after birth. Now the father, if he's not aware of this, he can't stop it, even if he wants to, because an unmarried father doesn't acquire any rights over the baby at all until he signs a parental responsibility form, or he can jointly register the birth at the appropriate government office, but the woman doesn't have to do this for 6 weeks after birth. So whatever she does in the first 6 weeks is entirely up to her, because a woman acquires what's called parental responsibility on birth. All women, 100% of women, acquire parental responsibility on birth. And the PR, parental responsibility, is the key, because this gives you all the rights, legal and other, and responsibility for having a child in the UK. And in the absence of PR, you have great difficulty as a father doing anything. Now, a married father will automatically acquire a PR on birth, but if an unmarried father can acquire it in 3 ways. One is by marrying the mother. Second is by agreement with the mother. You fill out what's called a parental responsibility agreement, and she signs it, and it's stamped at the court, and then you get parental responsibility agreement. So again, it's by consent of the mother, so she has the veto.
Right.
And obviously she has the veto on marriage as well, so those two are subject to the veto of the mother. And if you can't get her to agree, either to marry you or to sign a parental responsibility agreement, then the third way is to go to court and get what's called a parental responsibility order. And that is if you can find a judge who's not prejudiced against you and doesn't believe the only reason you're doing this is to harass and pester and annoy the woman, then he will grant a parental responsibility order. But this can take many months, obviously, if she fights it. So in that intervening time after birth, until you can get PR, in one of those three ways. The mother has absolute 100% control over every aspect of the child's life, and the father has zero influence and input unless the mother chooses. So for example, if she wants to circumcise the baby, that's her choice, you can't stop it. You can apply to court, but you obviously don't have PR at that point, and so good luck with that one. But it's possible you might be able to delay it if you know it's going to happen beforehand. If the mother wants to decide, well, the mother can decide the religion of the baby, but most importantly is the baby's name. And again, as an unmarried father, you cannot register the birth on your own. You can only jointly register the birth, and it's at the registration that the baby's name is set in stone on birth certificate. And if the mother chooses, she can name a father, but she has no requirement to do so on the application form. And she could even name her lesbian partner as the father, if you can work that one out. And there was a case, and the lesbian co-partner won to be named as the father on the birth certificate. Can you work that out?
Yeah, that's really abusive.
It's just absurd. A birth certificate is meant to be a factual record of biology, not some arbitrary piece of paper to do in the LGBT whatever campaign against heterosexuality. It's absurd. Anyway, yeah, so during these 6 weeks, it's entirely the woman's prerogative. She has absolute control. She can do whatever she likes to the baby, vaccinations or not vaccinate. You have no say or input into this unless you're aware of it beforehand, and you can make an emergency application to court. Good luck with that. So once the mother chooses to go to have the baby registered, again, if she doesn't tell you, you don't get parental responsibility. So if she tells you and you jointly register the birth, then you acquire PR, and the birth certificate is your proof that you're the father. But are you the father? Because you may believe it, she may tell you you're the father, but the only way to prove it with almost 100% certainty is to have a paternity test. Unfortunately, the paternity test for an unmarried father is illegal without the consent of the mother, because you're going to be taking a sample of the baby, and to take the sample, that is an assault on the baby, and without the mother's consent you can't do it. It's a criminal offence to take a sample of a baby for the purpose of paternity testing without the consent of the mother. That's how absurd it is, unless you're married, and so on. And there's a huge problem with paternity fraud. Paternity tests are now less than £100 in England. A lot of fathers have been doing them, and the paternity testing companies report something like 20% of the fathers who send in the sample are not the biological father of the child. So we can only speculate as to what the conversation was like afterwards at home, and how many of these women are doing this deliberately and so on. But almost no, I think one woman has been taken to court so that the father could claim damages. It's not a criminal offence to commit paternity fraud and screw somebody out of tens of millions of pounds in child support payments, and you can't even ask for the money back successfully. So it's horrendous. The most fundamental thing is knowing you are the parent of a child, and you can't prove it in England without risking breaking the law. And if you do prove you're not the father, then the woman gets away with it. It's absurd. So you can see why more and more women are breaking the law, and if they have sex with multiple partners around the time when they conceive, then they're able to name the one that's got the most money as the father, and take advantage that way.
So one scenario I can imagine is that this woman is having sex with like 20 men at nightclubs or somewhere, and then she chose one rich guy among the 220 people, 20 men, and then but the man says, maybe I'm not the father, let's do the DNA test. But the woman refuses, so the man can do nothing. Then
he can apply to court.
Yeah, but eventually the man will naturally become the father, or the so-called father, because he needs to pay, because he's rich. He's need to pay for everything because of his responsibility. That's exactly what the woman wants.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's like this scenario is completely okay with the law, with the court.
Yeah, because you can't prosecute women for anything effectively under British law, and so anything women do, which is illegal, which is obviously illegal, like paternity fraud, they don't get prosecuted for. You can try and have a civil case. In theory, the child support agency, whose job it is to persecute men and extort money from them with extreme force, is a government department that it's horrendous legal powers to force men to pay money, and they will do so on the behest of the mother. And your one defense can be, I'm not the father, but they can't force the mother to do a paternity test. If she refuses, then they will just take the money from you anyway and say, I'm sorry, she's not consented, so you've got to pay because she says so. What you can do is apply to court, and that you can fight the case through the courts to try and get them to order her to allow a paternity test. Good luck with that. So it's horrendous.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the baby's born. She says it's yours.
Yeah.
You accept, or you give up the fight, and you take on the responsibility of having the child and being a father. And that's when the real battle begins, if she chooses to do so.
This is just the beginning of a discrimination.
It's the beginning of 16 years. The court loses interest when the child gets to 16. You can have 16 years of a battle with the mother overseeing your child. So the fact she names you, and the fact she goes to the child support agency and says you're the father, give me 15% or whatever of your income, does not give you any rights whatsoever to see the child. None whatsoever, if she chooses. It's all up to the woman. So this is where I got into it, because I couldn't believe that because I assumed I would have 50-50, and maybe 1 week with the mother, 1 week with me, alternate weeks seems reasonable. You know, I used to believe in equality was built into the British system. I used to believe in justice in the British system. I used to, yeah, until I had a father, until I became a father and had a child, and then you realise that the whole system's stacked against you. So I got involved with an organisation called Families Need Fathers, which is a charity set up, I think, in the 1970s, still running today in Britain. Recommend that you make a donation to them, because they're the only organisation supporting separated dads in the ongoing battle of seeing their children against recalcitrant mothers. So,
yeah, just now you talk about this charity organization. Was it important?
Yeah, in my life it was very important, because I got involved in the local group in Cambridge, well, Newmarket it was originally.
Children brought us a lot of happiness, sometimes sorrow maybe.
When it comes to, as long as you stay with the mother, it's great. And the golden rule is don't have sex with anyone that you wouldn't want to be a mother with and spend the rest of your life with. So,
yeah.
Because if you have a baby, you're going to have a relationship with that woman for the rest of your life, whether you like it or not. Children generally outlive us, and so pick the right woman.
Otherwise, a miserable life starts.
Yeah, absolutely. And the suicide rate for men in Britain is horrendous because of the Families Need Fathers was set up to support separated parents who wanted to spend more time with their children, and found the whole system was stacked against them. And that was in the 70s. Things have got worse, not better, since it started, unfortunately. I got involved when my son was born in the late 1990s, and eventually I took over the local group, and we moved from Newmarket to Cambridge. And I ran that for many years, and now Brian's taken over. Thank you, Brian, so that I could come to China and continue the support, or he continues the support. Basically, it's twice monthly meetings when usually fathers, let's say, some mothers come along as well, because some of the laws are indirect discrimination, and so whoever the primary carer is, and that of course could be a man, but very unlikely. Over 90% of primary carers are women, and so they have the power. The power goes with being primary carer. So this is indirect gender discrimination against men, because overwhelmingly it's women who have this power. But sometimes men do. Sometimes men take advantage of their position of power and exploit it, and so we get some separated women coming along, separated parents. So for the purpose of the discussion from now on, we'll talk about primary carers, who are the parent with whom the child spends most of their time, and the secondary carer is the other parent, usually the father, who gets less than 50% of the time. Only a tiny percentage of cases have true 50-50 equality, 1 week with mum, 1 week with dad, or some other equivalent arrangement, which in my opinion is obviously the right way of doing it. When it comes to money, after divorce, in the absence of children, it's automatically 50-50. They don't care who earned it, where the money came from, it's automatically divided equally. Obviously that's unfair to mostly unfair to men. That's indirect gender discrimination against men, who overwhelmingly are the wealthier ones going into the marriage. But coming out of the marriage in divorce, it's equal 50-50. So why, it's beyond me, except obviously for feminist domination of the legal system, that the arrangement for children is not equal after separation. It's obvious to me that the children value both parents are equally important to the child's upbringing, and the only way you can reflect that, if unfortunately parents can't stay together, is to have equal time, however you divide that. And the changeovers should be minimised, so 1 week with mum, 1 week with dad is probably the best compromise. Alternate days is not fair on the child, and too many changeovers is not good if the parents have to come face to face in order to hand over the children. So handover at school is best. So mum collects the child from school on a Friday and keeps the child till the following Friday. Then dad collects the child from school the following Friday, keeps the child for the week, and so on. So that way the parents never need to meet, and they both get a week.
Because if they meet, they may argue, in front of the kids. That's
domestic abuse is a big problem, and again, it's overwhelmingly discriminating against men, because there's this presumption, of course, that the woman is the victim, the man is the perpetrator, even though the evidence is overwhelming that it's about equal numbers of victims. And so both parents are equally likely to be guilty of this, and you don't want to argue in front of the children. It's very bad for the children. And so what you need to do is try to avoid handovers as much as possible, face-to-face handovers. And if you do them in public rather than in private, then it's probably better as well. There's maybe cameras around or something to cover what's going on. If the woman then makes a false allegation of domestic abuse or something else she claims happened and refuses to let the father have the child, very common, unfortunately. So that's the background. So the reality is, what happens after you separate? Well, the first strong piece of advice is don't leave the family home until you have decided in writing what the arrangements are going to be after separation. Because if you leave the family home without the child, you become the de facto secondary carer immediately, and then you've got an uphill battle. There's two fundamental discrimination issues going on in the family courts. One is that the judges overwhelmingly favour women, because you can't become a judge unless you're prejudiced in favour of women in Britain, unfortunately. The second thing is they favour the primary carer, and they won't disturb the status of primary carer except in extreme circumstances. So as a primary carer, you're 60-40 up before you walk into court. As a woman, you're 60-40 up before you walk into court. So you put the two together, so a female primary carer, which is over 90% of the time, 60 times 60, whatever that is 80%, whatever, I don't know. So the courts are overwhelmingly favouring women and primary carer. If you're a father who's a primary carer, it sort of cancels out and you've got a reasonable chance. But basically, the status quo argument is very powerful. So advice number one, don't leave the family home until you've got a written agreement with the mother over money, over who's going to pay for the house, over how much contact you can have with the child after separation. And in fact, what is even more bizarre, and I don't recommend this because I think it should be illegal, is to run off with the child. A lot of women will do this. They will simply choose a time of their convenience to leave the father and run away from the family home, taking the child, claiming they're victims of domestic violence without any evidence at all. And they'll go running to one of the 600 women's refuges around Britain, which are only too happy to welcome the victims of domestic violence, i.e. the mothers, into the home with the child. If you're a father and you run away and you look for a male refuge, good luck. There's 5 in the whole country.
Not many, so few, right?
Yeah, it's absurd. Total discrimination.
But the women are not facing any consequence because of doing that?
No, none whatsoever. And once they get into a women's refuge and they're accepted, then that becomes de facto proof that they're victims of domestic violence, simply because they've been accepted at a women's refuge. And they can use that in other legal proceedings later on. You just couldn't make up this crap. Anyway, so the father, technically you can go to the local authority in your area, and you can make an application as homeless, because technically you are homeless because it's not safe for you to stay at home with the violent mother. So you make an application and they'll laugh you out of court, but you know, you can make the application. You need evidence, and even, you know, you can go to the police with blood streaming from a cut on your face where she hit you, and they will, you know, they may or may not even believe you that it, you know, they'll think you caused it, because the police are institutionally discriminatory against or prejudiced against men. So, but you know, if she does attack you and you have got physical proof, then do take pictures. Do try going to the police or go to the A&E, accident emergency, at the local hospital, and get some third-party evidence that you were cut, you were bruised, so you can use it in later proceedings. But don't believe, because they're all prejudiced against you. Don't believe this will
actually very unlikely, because a female is like beating up a man. This is very unlikely.
It's not unlikely. Why do you say it's unlikely?
I mean, because female are like weaker than
no, they're not.
Men.
What do you mean weaker?
It's possible they scratch like
well,
cats.
Firstly, what do you do if you're asleep? You know, she can attack you while you're asleep.
Yeah,
secondly, if you're not ready for it. Yeah, in a fight, if you say, okay, let's have a fight, you're ready for it, of course you're stronger. But she could have a weapon, and you don't. And she can attack you when you're not expecting it.
Right.
And so it's very easy for a woman to attack men. Plus, also, men are taught from a very early age not to hit women.
Right.
Women are not taught from an early age. Women are never told not to hit men. So she's got no reason not to hit you, but you've got a lot of reason not to hit her. So okay, so she comes at you and trying to attack you, and you defend yourself by grabbing the wrist. Okay, you squeeze too hard, you bruise the wrist. She will then use that as evidence that you attacked her, rather than the fact you were simply defending yourself.
Well, what I was trying to say is that maybe the general sense, people generally believe that women are weaker than men, so that's why whatever women said can be truer than what men said.
Yeah, it's prejudice.
This is why the women's false allegations can be believed and accepted.
Absolutely.
I just want to mention another kind of a violence. It's called language violence. That's the way I describe it.
Yeah, verbal abuse.
Yeah, they just women are arguably more talkative about stuff, criticizing and emotional. I mean, sometimes.
Maybe.
So sometimes they make a man very irritated. That's why sometimes
it's called provocation. Yeah, I mean, one of the many techniques nasty women use is to provoke a man into attacking them, either verbally or physically, and then claiming, "Oh dear, I'm the victim. You know, you hit me." And of course, you shouldn't respond to it. You should walk away.
According to law, there is no verbal abuse.
Well, as I said, the law is, on the face of it, is gender neutral, but the interpretation and the prejudice of the police and courts and everything is entirely in favour of the woman. So if the woman believes she's at risk of you attacking her, if she believes she's a victim of domestic violence, you've got a hard job proving that she's not. But yeah, domestic abuse is financial, sexual, physical, verbal, psychological, emotional, whatever. Any of these things can constitute domestic abuse if she chooses to believe she's a victim. But the reason for doing this is to get the children. And the reason is that what happens is there's a limited amount of what's called legal aid available in Britain. And you see, using lawyers is very expensive. Most people can't afford to pay lawyers to fight their case for them. And so what they have to do is persuade the government that their case is so important that the government should pay a lawyer to look after them, and they get what's called legal aid. And legal aid is conditional. And the way it's conditional is you have to be a victim of domestic violence in order to get legal aid. That's one. I mean, there's other characteristics and categories, but for most family law is not eligible for legal aid anymore. For the last, 5-6 years, the law changed. And so to get legal aid, you need to be a victim of domestic violence. And so you have to persuade someone, the police or a doctor or Women's Refuge, to write a letter saying they believe you're a victim of domestic violence, and then you can get legal aid. That's why they have to provoke the man into attacking them in order to get legal aid. And then they have a lawyer, and he doesn't. There's no equality of arms. in the family courts. So the woman gets legal aid, the man doesn't, and that's where Families Need Fathers came in, was to try and equal that unequal situation by trying to help the father, so that when he went into battle with the woman in front of a prejudiced anti-male judge, he would stand a chance in the battle if he was prepared for what was coming. There's also another form of legal assistance that you can get in the family courts called a Mackenzie friend, and this is quite often is another separated dad who has got lots of experience and came out the other side of the battle with his ex-wife and survived and was willing to help other fathers, and so he set himself up as a Mackenzie friend. And I did this for a while as well before I became a lawyer, and basically you can either do it for free or you can get some payment for your services for supporting fathers in the family court. Because family courts are secret courts. The only people allowed in the court building are the parties and one specific supporter, a Mackenzie friend or a legal representative. They're not open to the public normally.
Secrets.
Completely secret. They say, there's a phrase which is a British proverb: justice must not just be done, it must be seen to be done.
Yeah.
And the reverse is also true, which is injustice must not be seen. And so the family courts, where huge amounts of injustice go on, are closed courts, so the public are not allowed in.
So we can clearly see the imbalance between man and women rights.
Yeah, so we'll look at the context. So you want to see your children and the courts won't, your mother won't let you, so what you do? So the first thing she'll do is obviously try to preempt the situation by stealing the kids, running away with the kids, kidnapping them, and then she becomes the default primary carer. And the courts don't punish her for doing this, they in fact reward her for doing this by giving her de facto primary care status. Then, so what you do, and I'm not recommending fathers do this, although some fathers will probably run away with the children and then they can become the de facto primary carer. But beware, because of the prejudice against fathers, if the mother acts quickly, she may find that you get punished for doing it. So I don't recommend it. But of course, you can't punish women in the British legal system, and so she gets rewarded for doing that, and you get stopped from seeing the children. So what you have to do is you want to apply to the family court for a contact order, which orders her to provide the children to you. This is the steps you have to do. Firstly, you won't get legal aid, so you need to study and research as much as you can before you get. So go to your local Families Need Fathers group, get support, get as much advice as you can, and get evidence. Keep records of anything she said to you in any written form, WeChat, Facebook, any messaging, emails and stuff. You've got to keep everything, and you've got to treat it like a criminal case, because ultimately it could be. You need to protect yourself, and you need to record every conversation you have with her surreptitiously, because it's illegal to record without her consent. So you need to keep your phone on with you at all times, so you record everything that happens, just in case she says something you can use against her in court. So if you try to go to court, they will say you have to try mediation first. Mediation is a process whereby a so-called independent third party will contact you separately, parties separately, will try and find out what you are intending, what you would like as a settlement, and then if both parties agree, then you have a three-way discussion. And the mediator is meant to be impartial, although most of them are prejudiced in favour of women, of course. Most of them are women. And the idea is that they will bring the two of you together. There are some good mediators out there, and some of them are just neutral. But of course, there's no requirement to cooperate, just a requirement to try mediation. If mediation fails, the mediator will sign a certificate saying that mediation has failed, and only then are you allowed to go to court, except in an emergency. And then you can make the contact order application. Then there will be at least a 6-week delay during the virus, of course. The delays are infinite. But anyway, there's a delay while the court decide whether to list your case for a hearing. And so there will be long delay depending on how long because they're not a priority for the court, of course. The only person who cares about your case is you. So the court will lose the paperwork, you will have to chase the court, you may have to raise a complaint because the court hasn't listed the case yet, and they'll have lost it. Meanwhile, the mother is cementing her position as the primary carer, poisoning the child's mind against you, saying how awful you are, what you're going to do to the child when you get to see the child. It's called parental alienation syndrome, and again, it's overwhelmingly the primary carer, normally the mother, who does this to poison the child against you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it.
The baby is easily misled.
Of course. Children want to please the parent they're with. So if the mother, I had a horrible case where we were just about to go to court, and the father was not willing to talk to the mother, so he made sure that he never answered the phone, and it went on the answering machine. So when the mother rang a week before the hearing, she was recording her message for him, we could use it in court. Not that it made any difference because the judge is prejudiced, but so you could hear her talking to this 5-year-old, and they'd obviously rehearsed it on the phone, so you can hear the mother shouting at the child, "Do you love mummy? Yes. Do you love daddy? No. Do you want to live with mummy? Yes. Do you want to live with daddy? No. Did I tell you to say this? Yes." Whack. It's all recorded.
Yeah, if you don't record this, how can you prove that, right?
Exactly, but
Nobody
it didn't do
knows.
any good, because when we went to court and we used this in evidence to show what a horrible mother she was, we had the mother's mother and the mother's sister as witnesses for the father, also saying what a horrible mother she was. And at the end of the trial, the judge said, the father and his witnesses have painted such a black picture of this woman that I don't believe it.
Oh my God, is he a judge or the mother's brother-in-law?
So he's the senior family court judge in Northampton County Court said this. It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. And
Total unfairness.
total unfairness. It's like, well, what do you do if the judge is so prejudiced that he doesn't believe the evidence against the woman? And we had a lot of good evidence against the woman. It was just absolutely ridiculous.
This self-protection sense is very important, because most of the time people do not really record anything or leave any evidence.
Yeah.
Otherwise, when they go to court, they have nothing. It's only about a she says.
Yeah, his word against hers,
Yeah.
and because they're all prejudiced in favour of the mother, you've got no chance,
Right.
unless you've got third-party evidence or you've recorded something.
Yeah.
So how do you get it? So you may go to court, you get if you're lucky, the judge will believe you have a right. She can stop you seeing the child, she can make up allegations of violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, rape, child abuse, all kinds of things, and the judge will say, oh, you can't see the child until we've investigated this. And that can take many years because you're trying to prove a negative. How do you prove you didn't do something that never happened? You try, it's great, it's impossible. And so this goes on until it can go on for many, many months and years, and you don't get to see the child in the interim. If you're lucky and she doesn't go quite that far, but she makes some kind of allegations, then an organisation called CAFCAS, Child and Family Court Advisory Support Service, will allocate one of their, again, prejudiced anti-male workers, usually a woman, to investigate your case, and if you're lucky they're reasonable, most of them are not. And they will then come and observe contact between you and the child and report on every little thing you do. And if you're lucky, it will be balanced, although very rarely the report is balanced. And then they will give a verbal report to the court. They don't have any evidence, they don't record what they're seeing. It's simply their opinion, which will be presented to the court. And that can be selective or it can be balanced, depending on the prejudice of the CAFCAS reporter. They will then be treated as an expert in the family courts, and their recommendations over subsequent contact will almost always be upheld by the judge, because the judge doesn't know you and doesn't know anything about you, and this is the only third-party evidence he has. So you know, it's an uphill battle. If you're lucky, they're not involved in your case, and then the judge will, if you're really lucky, give you alternate weekends and half the holidays. That's the typical fair contact. And then if the mother will then tell you when you can see the child, collect the child, and unless it's written clearly and concisely and unambiguously in the court order, she can use her wriggle room in order to stop you seeing the child. So what happens if she doesn't turn up for contact at the agreed time in the agreed place? Nothing. You call her, she will turn her phone off. You call her twice, and you will be done for harassment. Calling a woman twice when it's not welcome, 2 calls is harassment, and you get a police warning for harassing her. So how do you chase up the woman if she doesn't make contact? Well, if you call one of her friends or family, that's harassing her indirectly, and so you can get a criminal record for doing it. Once you've got a criminal record for harassing her, you've got a very, very difficult uphill battle to see the children, because you're a criminal, and criminals of course should not be allowed to see their children.
So she can violate and the father can do nothing.
Yeah, we have one case where the father got an injunction. It's called a non-molestation order, stopping him from seeing the child, seeing the mother, contacting the mother. She called him, because the non-molestation order only works one way. She called him and said, "Hi, come round." So he came round and they had sex, and the following morning she called the police and he was arrested for breaking the non-molestation order.
Oh my God.
Yeah. This is how unfair the system is in Britain.
What a strategy.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. Incitement to commit a crime, if you're a woman inciting a man to commit a crime, breaking a non-molestation order is not a crime. I just couldn't make this stuff up.
Well, yeah. In this video, we have covered the abortion, prenatal care, registration, birth.
Can I just say one more point before you sum up? I know we're
sure.
15 minutes. Yeah, just on the final point, if you prove conclusively she has broken the court order for contact, and you take her back to court for contempt of court, and she should go to prison for up to 6 months, the court will look for a reason for her breaking the order, and chances are the court will reduce your contact, not increase it, because the court cannot punish the woman. They cannot send her to prison, even though they have the legal power to do so, because they are so prejudiced against the idea of condemning a woman that the only way they would do it is they will reduce your contact and hope she doesn't break the order, because then they won't have to punish her. So anyway, if you're really, really lucky, she may get one night in prison, and then maybe and if you're really, really lucky, they'll reverse custody and give you the child as the best outcome, because clearly she is institutionally opposed to you seeing the child, and that's obviously overwhelmingly bad for the child. And if you get a really, really good judge, or you go to the Supreme Court after 5 years of this abuse and so on, you might get reversal of residence. Good luck.
Yeah, so this institutionalized discrimination is really harsh on men, because women can generally take advantage of this.
Yeah, all the way through the system, the whole system, as we've seen over the last 45 minutes.
So let's wrap up a little bit. I mean, in this video we talk about the abortion and prenatal care, birth registration. Also, Ian mentioned his support or advocacy of this local group, right?
Yeah, Families Need Fathers. I recommend that you go along and talk to them,
and
get support from them.
Also his friend Brian for
taking over my local group. Thank you, Brian.
Excellent. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about human rights or men's rights from Ian. And we're gonna talk to you in the future videos. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.